This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Yeah, mama.
Thank you all so much for joining us here today. We are so happy to have you with us on this crazy journey we call the Creep Street Journey.
That's right. Buckle up. All aboard.
Please. To be kept up on what we're doing, feel free to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on TikTok, and on our Facebook page, we have a separate group called Citizens of the Milky Way. It's just a smaller forum where anyone can write on there and add memes, funny articles, anything like that. We highly recommend you go ahead and check that out. Any and all are welcome.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Also, if you are a fan of the show, please like, rate, subscribe, comment, give us a rating, anything like that. It really helps out the podcast a lot, and we so appreciate it.
Yes, it really helps us out. Big time.
Big time, baby. Now, if one episode a week is not enough for you, and it's not.
Let's face it. It's not, you junkie.
It's okay. It's just not the case. But the good news is we've got your solution right here, your next fix, as it were.
Amen.
It is at patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. There we have all sorts of bonus content ranging from movie commentaries to short stories to our rankings of different movie franchises, ranging all the way up to full bonus episodes.
That's right. Come to the place where heroes meet at Patreon.
Yes, patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Now, also, we are preparing for our listener stories episode that we do twice a year.
Yes, can't wait for that.
Yes, we do that every year, once in the wintertime, once in the summertime. So please feel free to reach out and let us know your personal stories. Have you seen a ghost? Is there a weird true crime story in your town, or maybe an urban legend that is centered on your hometown? Anything like that, we want to hear about it. So feel free to reach out to us on any of our socials, or you can email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Now, Dylan.
Yeah.
What is going on today? What are we talking about? What is just going to get us all freaked out?
Well, let me tell you something. This is my favorite kind of episode.
Oh.
There's no backstory to set up. You know, typically when we're telling like a story that we typically set up like, oh, there's a family, they move into this house.
Right.
Weird things start happening.
Oh, yeah.
There's a build-up. This one, there's no build-up because we don't know what these things are. This is the best.
Ooh.
This is the kind of episode, it's best when you're sitting by the campfire.
Oh, yeah.
Or you're sitting around, sitting in the dark. This is one of those, this one will really get under your skin.
Ooh.
Today we are talking about Faceless Phantoms. All right, now let me tickle your taints with my sources here.
Please do, please.
I've got two from Mysterious Universe, bizarre encounters with faceless humanoid entities and strange forced entity encounters by an alleged search and rescue worker, both by Brent Swanser. The Phantoms and Monsters website by Lon Strickland, also Reddit, and a selection from yokai.com.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, a nice smattering, a smorgasbord of sources there. Now, once again, this is one of those topics that doesn't really fit neatly into a specific category. And as the title suggests, we are talking about encounters with faceless beings. But what's strange about them is how many of them have been seen, except they don't obviously have a face. And these entities are tied to everything from hauntings to UFOs, even cryptozoology. And for this episode, we're going to take a look at a number of these sightings and see if we can't find similarities and differences that might categorize them.
Oh, okay.
Well, this first encounter we're going to talk about was actually made famous by the one and only great Coast to Coast AM. On the July 15th, 2016 episode, a guest call-in named Nate, who lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, Nate was a truck driver, and he had his encounter while trucking a shipment from Des Moines, Iowa to Chicago, Illinois. It should be noted that Nate had just awakened from a full 8-hour sleep, so he had taken the time to stop and rest in Des Moines. So, obviously truck drivers go long periods of time without sleep, so it's not like this guy was seeing things because he was tired.
Right, he had just woken up from a substantial quality sleep.
A long winter's nap. So he was well rested, and he's driving his truck east along I-80 when something strange caught his attention. It was about dusk, and the sun was just about to set, and I was driving, and I seen a figure just ahead of me on I-80, and it was right at the side of the road. When I say right on the side of the road, I don't mean in the grass. Its toes were right on the white line. I slowed down a little bit to kind of see what was going on there and maybe avoid it. When I got about 50 yards from it, I got down to about 50 miles an hour, and I could see it clear. I had my brights on and everything. It was a man. Well, it looked like a man, about maybe 5'9" or 5'10". Couldn't have been more than 100 pounds soaking wet. When I got up to him, he looked at me. And George, I kid you not, he had no eyes, no mouth, no nostrils. There was no orifice on his face. He was pale white, no hair, no features whatsoever. It looked like a skeleton with bleached white skin. He was just kind of standing there looking right at me. I slowed down, and as soon as I seen his face, he looked up at me. Boy, I flipped the hammer down from Illinois all the way to Chicago. I never looked back. My blood ran cold. My hair stood up. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen in my life.
Spooky.
Well, very spooky, very spooky. Now, I want to wait to start dissecting these till we get a little bit of variety.
Okay.
Because there are very interesting distinctions between some of these encounters.
Okay.
Well, this next one happened in British Columbia, Canada, near the Okanagan Valley. This was originally posted to the website Phantoms and Monsters, which we've used as a source before, especially in episodes like these where we're retelling people's encounters. I think we used them a lot in the Pale Crawlers episode. Great resource. The poster said that his friends would often go for long drives late at night just to pass the time. They could talk, listen to music, whatever, and, well, on one of these late-night drives, the boys were making their way down a deserted forest road near their hometown, and up until that point, it had been a typical night for them. But that's when it all changed. Here's what they said happened next. One night we were up in the hills, probably 5 miles from the nearest house. We came around a blind corner, and there's an old lady walking on the side of the road. She was wearing a long coat and a hood or shawl. We both muttered something like, "What the?" Dee laughed and said, "Should we stop?" He slowed down the car, about to ask if she was okay, lost, or needed a lift, etc. But as we got close, we noticed she had no face. It looked like she had a big gray hole where her face should be. No details or features, just a gray void. We were basically speechless and just slowly rolled by her. I watched her in the rearview mirror as we turned a corner. We couldn't think of any explanation why someone would be out there at 2, 3 a.m. We both saw the same lack of facial features. So now it's in a woman's form. So we know that it's not just male-like features. It can also take a sort of woman-like form. Well, if you thought you were safe from faceless entities in the daytime, you'd be wrong.
Oh, God.
You'd be dead wrong, pal. Another post on Phantoms and Monsters recalls just that. This poster said she had gone to pick her child up from school, but she arrived early and had some time to kill. So she decided to check out a nearby historical park, And it was a charming park with a river running through it, and close by there was an old 19th century grist mill. So she pulled up and parks her car in the parking lot, and there were 2 other cars there, a white, brand new looking BMW sedan and an older gold Honda. Neither of their owners were in their cars, so she just assumed they were also out and about walking in the park. Well, this is what she says happened next. So I go about my way and check out the park. I walk along the path, and there's a small waterfall, and then after that, you get to the grist mill. Really cool building. So I kill enough time and head back to my car. I get about 15 feet from my car, and I smell an intense dead animal smell. I've had a hefty handful of paranormal experiences and instantly feel uneasy. I quickly get into my car and look into my rearview mirror to start reversing. In the rear view, I see inside the Honda, and I instantly freaked because in the back seat, I see a faceless woman with long brown disheveled hair. Faceless as in hollow and all black with no features. Her hair looked like it had been matted with twigs. I'm spooked and I keep my eyes on the figure as I head out. Then its head turned and its gaze followed me the whole ride out.
Damn, these are scary.
Once again, a woman, hair that seems to be matted with twigs. The witness had an eerie feeling before. She had a smell that she smelled, while other witnesses did not. So this, I feel like, may be more of a ghost situation.
Right. I could see that as well.
See, we're starting to get a little variety here, and there's a buffet of variety ahead of us here. Clean your plates, pals, because we're going in for a second helping.
Ooh!
This next encounter was posted about on Reddit by a user named Big Amen. This encounter happened in 2013 in a small town a little south of Dallas, Texas. He was down there visiting his girlfriend, who was attending a university nearby there, and it was about 11 p.m., and the 2 lovebirds became a bit peckish. So the witness says he set out to pick up some takeout. Now, because this was a small town, the witness said that the roads were rather dark, with only the occasional street light passing by. Because of this, just to be safe, he made sure to park his car underneath one of these street lights, just so it was at least somewhat lit. So he leaves his girlfriend's place and he begins walking to his car. And almost immediately, things got weird.
Oh no.
In his post, he says this. I remember walking off her porch and starting my way down the street a few houses down until I could start to see my car under that yellow light maybe 100 yards away at this point. It was awfully quiet and dark, but at this point I had no signs to alert me of anything to be worried about. It wasn't until I walked right up to my car and around to the driver's side that I came across a very odd and off-putting sight. It was a man, maybe my height, around 6 foot, in normal clothing. But he was crouching about 15 feet away from my car. Looked maybe middle-aged to me, but even though the light was shining above to show his clothing and figure clearly, I couldn't make out any facial features or anything of that matter. My first reaction was possibly a car robbery or a homeless man, but that fear quickly turned to dread. It was that type of feeling where you knew you were feeling fear, but it was a type of fear of something unfamiliar. Yet I knew something was off and unnatural about this. Growing up in a big city, I have had plenty of run-ins with people in the streets, whether just friendly homeless or drug-affected people acting out. However, both of these suspicions faded away as I stood there dead still, just staring, expecting some type of reaction. At this point, maybe 10 seconds had passed, and I made the first move to get into my car quickly and lock the doors, being sure not to lose sight of the man all along. I turned the car on and reversed back to turn my car so that my headlights are directly facing the man. This is when my stomach absolutely dropped. His face was just blank. With my headlights on him, I could now see him clearly. A collared long-sleeve button-up and dark pants, but his face was completely void of any features. No eyes, no mouth, just indentations and outlines where they should be found, almost like an unfinished wax figurehead of some sort. While viewing him, I realized he was now standing, but seemed taller. That's when I looked down to see he was now floating, maybe a foot off the ground, facing my car directly. The amount of fear I felt at this point made my face feel numb, and every alarm bell in my brain told me to leave now. I turned my car around and quickly drove away towards the college. Okay.
I mean, can you imagine?
Horrifying. And, let's go ahead and break some things down about this.
Yes.
When he leaves his girlfriend's house, despite it being very dark and deserted, he does not get that forbidding fear, that foreboding fear.
Right.
Even when he initially sees the stranger, his primary concern is that it's a criminal of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't until he actually sees the blank face that he becomes utterly terrified. And consider how this entity is dressed. Aside from the obvious blank face, it's tall, seems more masculine in appearance, and he seems to be wearing a button-down shirt with black slacks, a little more formal.
Right.
And of course, he describes its blank face as looking like an unfinished wax sculpture. Then, of course, the entity appears to float towards him, about a foot off the ground. Now, I obviously have no idea what this thing is, but with this story in particular, I get more of an Indrid Cold vibe or a Grinning Man vibe. I'm getting more of an interdimensional or extraterrestrial vibe, whereas with the last one, it felt more like a haunting, like a ghost or a spirit.
Right. I kind of get that same feeling too.
Well, it turns out this whole floating, hovering thing has been reported elsewhere. Another post on Reddit by a Reddit user named Similar Economics 4 tells a similar encounter they had while growing up in the town of Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. This is a small town where everybody sort of knows each other in one way or another, and there was typically no reason to feel unsafe. There was a time when his best friend lived nearby him, so often he and his brother would go visit their friend, and they would take a shortcut through an alleyway to get there quicker. Well, one day, while taking this shortcut, they had a terrifying encounter. This is what the witness posted. My brother and I start getting closer to our friend's house, and we see this man by the stop sign at the end of the alley. The stop sign is past our friend's house about 150 yards away, wearing silky white pants and a shirt. As we get closer, my heart starts pounding faster, and I realize he is floating, not walking. My brother saw it too and said he's floating, and we start running. This man thing looked at us at this point. He was about 100 yards away from us, and he literally had no face, just blank, blurred face. No eyes, nose, no nothing. We had reached our friend's house, and they were asking why we looked so scared, and we told them what happened, and the boys rode their bikes around the neighborhood, but saw nothing that fit our description. I still, to this day, have no idea what the heck it was, but it still makes my heart race. Once again, I'm only going on assumption, but this again feels more like an Indrid Cold or a Grinning Man sort of thing.
Right.
Well, buckle up, because this next one, if you didn't think it was freaky already, we're about to get freaky.
Oh, no.
This next encounter was posted about on a Reddit forum dedicated to strange humanoid encounters, and as the witness tells it, it was just past midnight, and she was sitting out on her front porch chatting on the phone with her boyfriend. Well, that's when she noticed about a block away a man who seemed to be staring at her, or at least in her direction. She peered at the man, trying to get a better look, but she couldn't make out any discernible features on his face. Here's what she said happened next. He was barefoot, shirtless, and wearing jean cutoffs. He had sandy brown hair, but where his face was supposed to be was utterly blank. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, nothing. Despite that, I still had the sensation that it was staring at me. I told my boyfriend what I was seeing, and he told me to close my eyes for a sec, thinking I was just tired. I did so, but when I opened them, the faceless man was closer to me. I stared, and it started moving closer to me. It wasn't walking, though. It was just sort of in the next spot with each blink. At this point, I had quite enough and went inside. I woke up my friends. There were 5 of us staying the night together, and we all piled into the window so I could show them this thing. It was gone, but an ambulance went down the street and stopped where the faceless man had started out. We didn't wait to see what rolled out with the EMTs. So this would sound like a ghost, right? Because an ambulance thing showed up.
Yeah.
Like, unless it's just unrelated, it would seem like maybe someone who had just perished.
Right.
Interesting.
That is so interesting. And that, like, was what I was kind of wondering, too. As soon as I heard the ambulance, I was like, oh, I know, if that's what that is.
Exactly. Well, if you weren't creeped out already, buckle up, Creep Street, because you're about to be. As we learned, encounters with these faceless beings have happened both at night and in broad daylight. So you probably think, well, damn it, I'm just going to lock my doors and never leave my house again.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but folks have even reported encounters with these things from within their own homes.
Oh no.
This was posted on Reddit by a user named Plimp69.
Oh, baby.
Who claimed to have an experience in the summer of 2011. The witness was a freshman in high school at the time, and on this particular night, he was suddenly woken up at 1 a.m. for no reason. But as he lay there in the dark, he began to sense that there was someone or something else in the room. Here's what he said in his post. A few minutes later, I heard faint footsteps. At first, I was thinking that it was just in my head. After a few minutes, I started to look around as I usually do whenever I wake up. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they sounded like they were literally outside my room. In my peripheral vision, I noticed that I couldn't see into my brother's room. He also used to sleep with the door open, and his room is across from mine. It was as if something was standing in front or blocking the entry. I got curious and turned to see what was blocking the entry, and I saw a humanoid figure, about 7 feet tall. It was faceless, bald, and had a fair skin complexion. It was dressed old-fashioned. It had a cream-colored sweater and what appeared to be random paint strokes and splashes on it of many colors, and black slacks. It was just standing there as if looking at me. I started analyzing it. It was abnormally thin and had freakishly long arms way past the knee. It also had visible veins running all over its faceless expression. I thought I was dreaming at first. I started blinking, shaking my head, and slapping myself in hopes that I was dreaming or hallucinating. I stopped and looked across. It was still standing there. I immediately freaked out when I found out I was not dreaming, and I pulled the covers over my face. I tried yelling for help, and I couldn't scream at all from the terror. 30 minutes later, I built up the courage and pulled the covers off to confront it, and it was gone. I haven't seen it ever since. My youngest brother also happened to see that thing earlier this year. So now, that sort of sounds to me almost like a shadow person, like it's there to feed.
Yes.
Off the fear in a way.
Mm-hmm. I kind of got that vibe too. But I mean, how creepy is that? The way that that thing is described just is so fucking chilling.
Very, very chilling. Now, this next encounter was written about by a researcher and author named Albert S. Rosales. This encounter took place in 2015 in the town of Belton, Missouri, and it happened to a couple who was living there. It was the middle of the night when the husband happened to wake up and notice what appeared to be a small pinpoint of red light racing across the wall and ceiling of their bedroom. Well, of course, the couple thought it was just some local kid, maybe with a laser pin light, that was just playing a prank. But what was weird was the couple had very thick bamboo blinds covering the windows, and it seemed unlikely that it would be possible for someone to shine a light into their bedroom like that. It concerned them enough that the couple actually notified authorities, but because there wasn't really anything to go on, there wasn't much they could do without any leads. So the family just tried to put it out of their minds the best they could. But a few nights later, things got out of control.
Oh no.
Here's what they said happened. This morning, he called me into his bedroom and told me that he had seen a being in his bedroom around 6 a.m. He said it appeared to be self-illuminating, very bright. He said it was about my height, which is approximately 5 foot 5 inches, and that it glowed and it had no face. He said its head was a little larger than a human's. He said when he saw it, the being was near the bedroom door. Apparently, when it realized my husband was watching it, the being looked slightly over its shoulder at my husband and very quickly exited the bedroom. My husband said it had no discernible features. It had no face. It was then he told me that the night he saw the laser, he'd also seen an approximately 3 foot by 3 foot square shape projected on the mirror of his closet doors. He said it looked like a large picture frame, and that there was a very bright light illuminating from within it, with strange black symbols that resembled hieroglyphics inside of what he described as small boxes that were also illuminated. He said he's never seen anything like them before. I asked him why he hadn't mentioned this before, and he told me that he couldn't understand how there was this large image in his mirror, because there are no windows on the west wall of his bedroom, so it couldn't have been a reflection. He wasn't going to mention it until he saw the being this morning. He told me he's very unnerved about these sightings since they're becoming repetitive. I'm concerned because my husband is not one to make up stories. He's very practical and down-to-earth kind of person. If he said he saw something, he did. Now that's interesting. These symbols, that once again sounds interdimensional or UFO related, maybe even.
I wonder what that's about.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, these next few encounters are very interesting, and they all come from one person.
Oh.
These were posted on Reddit by a user who claims to work as a wilderness search and rescue officer. His job, as the title suggests, is to go out and find missing folks when they get lost in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. The poster goes by the username Search and Rescue Woods, and he tells various stories that people have told him. Keep in mind, these aren't necessarily encounters he's had himself, but ones that co-workers, other people in the forest have told him.
Okay.
And these are quite unnerving. And just a side note, he tells of other strange encounters as well, with not just with faceless entities, some with beings that are sort of like black-eyed kids, and some with a sort of man-bear cryptid. But obviously, for the sake of this episode, we're going to focus on these faceless encounters.
Yes.
So here he tells of one.
I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevasse with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine, and when he'd gotten to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was just wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible, muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it.
Now, what's interesting about this is muffled screams would seem to indicate biological, like it's talking through its non-face,
right?
Like it's
right.
muffled. So that would seem to almost indicate like a biological being.
Yes.
I would think, you know what I mean? Who knows what it means? But very interesting. Now, this next encounter was told to the poster by a fellow colleague of theirs. Their colleague had been assigned to repaint an information sign that was located deep in the woods along a dark forest road. This sign was a bit off the ground, so to actually get up to paint it, the guy had to climb a ladder up to it. So the guy's out there going about his business painting the sign when he senses someone walk up to the ladder below him. Now, while this location is rather isolated, there is the occasional hiker or camper going by. So this guy didn't even take his eyes off the sign he was painting. The man below him asked for directions to the nearest campsite, and the guy told him it was just about 4 miles down the road. But while things started out fine, while they chatted, the man on the ladder began to feel this overwhelming sense of dread. Here's what he says happened next.
The second he came up and talked to me, the hairs on my neck stood up. But I wasn't sure why. I just had this really uneasy feeling about the whole thing, and I wanted to finish painting and get out of there. I figured maybe part of it was that I couldn't turn around to look at him, but something just felt off. There was also this weird smell floating around even before the guy talked to me. Kind of like old period blood. I had looked around to see what was causing it, but I didn't find anything. So I waited for the guy to walk away, but I didn't hear him leave, which made me think he was just standing there and watching me. So I asked again if there was anything I could do for him, and he didn't answer. I knew he was there, though, because I hadn't heard him leave. So I did this awkward turn on the ladder to look down and see what he was doing. Now, I admit it could have been just my brain fucking up, but I swear to you, Russ, for a split second, when I turned around, that fucker didn't have a face. Like he had no face. It was almost a concave and totally smooth, and I just about had a fucking heart attack because I couldn't even wrap my brain around what I was seeing. I think I started to say something, but there was a kind of pop inside my head, and suddenly he was just a normal-looking guy. I must have looked weird because he asked me if I was okay, and I just was like, yeah, I'm fine. He asked me about the campsite again, and I point to where he was to go, and he's like, I'm not from around here. Can you help me get there? Now, this is when I know something is really up, because there's no way this guy got out here and didn't know where he was. And for that matter, there's no car around. So how'd he get here in the first place? I said I was sorry, but I couldn't take him anywhere in a company vehicle, and he was like, please, I really don't know where I am. Can you come with me and help me get there? So now I'm seriously weirded out, and I start wondering if this is some kind of ambush or whatever. I told him I could call him a taxi to come out and take him where he wants to go. And I pulled out my phone, and he just goes, "No," and walks away really quickly. But he doesn't walk out of the park. He walks into the fucking trees. And I got right in my fucking truck and started to get out of there. Fuck the pain or whatever. I looked in my mirror to see where he was as I was leaving, and he was standing right at the tree line again. I don't know how he got there so fast, but this time I know that fucker didn't have a face. He was just watching me leave. And right before I turned the corner, he took a big step back into the trees and kind of dissolved, I guess. Maybe it was just dark so he blended in, but it felt more like he just melted away.
So this seems more predatory. This
Yes,
seems more
very predatory.
because, and what's interesting about this is he looks down, he sees the faceless being, but then it was like, the thing was like, oh shit, I gotta put my costume back on.
Right.
And he had a face again. So this seemed more like something trying to trick him.
Yes. And so weird that it just like walked right back into the forest, deeper into the forest.
Exactly, right. Now this next encounter was told to the poster by a senior search and rescue officer. The officer was out deep in the woods leading a training mission for a few new officers. It was late in the night and the officer could hear someone around the camp outside of his tent. He figured it was just one of the officers who had gotten up in the night to take a leak in the woods. But as he listened, he could hear that this person just seemed to keep walking deeper and deeper into the woods. So the guy gets out of his tent to make sure everything was okay, and this is what happened next.
I went to the edge of camp and I called to whoever it was and told them that camp was this way. But they kept going back out into the woods, so I went after them. I know it was stupid, but I was half asleep and I just really didn't want to deal with some idiot getting hurt. I followed this thing on a dead straight course for about a mile, and then it stopped on the edge of a little river. I could see the outline of it because the water was reflecting the moon, and it looked just like an ordinary guy. He had a pack on, and it looked like he was facing me. I asked if he was okay, if he needed help, and he cocked his head like he didn't understand me. I always have my pocket knife on me, and it's got a little thumb light attached to it. So I turned that on, and I lit up his chest so I wouldn't blind him. He was breathing slowly and deep, so I wondered if he was sleepwalking. I went closer and asked him again if he was okay. I moved the light up, and something didn't seem right, so I stopped. He kept breathing this real slow, deep breaths. And I sort of figured out gradually that that's what was bothering me. It was like he was pretending to breathe, but not actually doing it. His breaths were too even and deep, and all his movements were exaggerated, like his shoulders going up and his chest moving. I told him to identify himself, and he just made this muffled noise. I moved the light up, and I shit you not, this guy had no face, just smooth skin. I freaked out and I sort of fumbled my light, but I saw him move toward me, but he didn't actually move. I don't know how to explain it. But 1 second, he was at the edge of the river, and the next, he was 5 feet from me. I never looked away or blinked. It was like he moved so fast my brain couldn't keep up. I tripped and fell on my ass, and I could see this line open up on his throat. It stretched up to his ears, and his head tilted back, and he smiled at me with his throat. There wasn't any blood, just this gaping dark hole, and I swear he smiled at me with this gash in his throat. I got up and I ran as fast as I could back to camp. I couldn't hear him following me, but I felt like he was always right behind me, even though when I looked back I couldn't see him. I calmed down when I got back to the camp. The fire was still going, and I guess that pack mentality of being with other people made me stop and breathe a little.
That is so gross.
Wow.
Ugh.
Wow,
so
wow,
scary.
wow. That's freaky.
Ugh.
Once
God.
again, like the last one, that sounds almost like some sort of a forest entity.
Yeah, I don't know. All of these things, it's like, it's so hard to really know what is going on. Is it some sort of interdimensional being? Is it a ghost? Is it some sort of predatory animal?
Exactly,
Like, I don't
right.
know.
Well, before we wrap this beautiful package up, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. Longtime listeners will know we've done a yokai episode.
Yeah.
Well, there happens to be a famous yokai that is a faceless ghost. Its name, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce this, but its name is Napurabo, which translates to the faceless monk, though it is sometimes called Mugina. They are most often spotted along roadsides and at inns and shops, and because of their nearly human appearance, they're often able to blend in amongst the living. I'll read you this next portion right from the source.
Interactions. These mysterious yokai are encountered on quiet, empty roads late at night when nobody else is around. Like many yokai of this kind, their main activity seems to be scaring humans. This they do remarkably well. Napurabo usually appear in the guise of a man or a woman with his or her back turned towards the observer. When approached, the yokai turns around and reveals its terrifying true form. To maximize the effect, they often appear with a face at first, and then wipe their face off dramatically with their hand at the most opportune time. Napurabo revel in the terror they inflict upon their unsuspecting victims. Napurabo often work together in groups to scare one individual. As their victim runs away in a panic from the first Napurabo, he runs into another person who asks him what is wrong. When the victim explains what he saw, the person replies, "Oh, you mean like this?" and wipes his face away exactly like the first Napurabo. They even know to impersonate close relatives of their victims, and sometimes a poor man will run all the way home, having run into multiple faceless monsters, only to tell his wife what he saw and have her too reply, "Oh, you mean like this?" Other forms. The Napurabo is a favorite transformation of mischievous animal yokai Kitsune, Tanuki, and especially Mujina. In fact, so frequently are encounters with this spirit blamed on shape-shifting badgers that the Napurabo are often mistakenly referred to as Mujina.
Wow, that's scary.
So interesting thing there that they sort of wrote, which kind of sounds like the last few, especially the one where the guy, where it looked like it was faceless, then it had a face. It was almost like it forgot to put its costume on.
Right,
That kind of sounds like a Napurabo.
It does.
Very interesting.
And I don't know. I mean, all of these creatures are just horrifying, and there's just something that is so unhuman about it, or inhuman about it, that I think is so scary to see something that doesn't have a face, or even not just human at all. Like, it's just so unnatural to not have any kind of face at all.
Well, and also, what does the lack of face mean? Does it mean something happened that took their face, or is it more symbolic in nature?
Right.
Like, are they faceless because they were like a victim who was unknown, like no one knew their name or something, so the facelessness is like a metaphor in some ways. I don't know.
True. That's an interesting thing to
But
think about.
interesting when you look back, there's a variety of these stories, and they seem to come from different branches. Some clearly sound like hauntings or specters. Some sound like interdimensional beings.
Right. You just never know. And this is so scary. If any of you have any thoughts about this or any theories, feel free to reach out to us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com and let us know what you're thinking, because we'd love to hear all about it.
Well, let me list to you some names of some very gorgeous faces.
Oh, please. You know I love this part.
Of course, the dream James Watkins, the Finnish face Via Lundqvist, the madman Marcus Hall, the vivacious Vicky McHugh, the tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the heartbreak kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British bone breaker Bex Martin, the notorious Nicholas Barker, the terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the loathsome Johnny Love, the carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the killer stud Carl Staub, the fire starter Heather Carter, the conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the awfully awesome Annie, the murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the maniacal Laura Maynard, the vicious Karen Van Buren, and the arch nemesis Aaron Bird.
Wow. Thank you so much for listing off all of those righteous names. Those are our top tier Patreon subscribers there. And if you want to be like them, feel free to check out patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
Please like, rate, subscribe, give us that hot 5 stars on whatever app you listen on. Of course, it helps us out so much.
Yes, and once again, please feel free to reach out to us with your personal stories.
Yes.
We'd love to hear those so we can add those to our episode.
Absolutely. Cannot wait to dive into a new batch of listener stories. Cannot wait. Well, citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
A good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.